I still remember that February afternoon like a scar beneath the skin, faded, but impossible to forget. Burlington High's red brick walls glowed in the winter sun, and the frozen air carried the faint scent of snowmelt and cafeteria coffee. I was 15, awkward, hopeful, and invisible in the way that quiet boys who love words often are. The bell had just rung, scattering laughter and sneakers across the courtyard. I clutched my worn notebook, the one I carried everywhere, filled with half-finished poems and short stories no one had ever read. I was halfway to the gate when I heard someone call my name. "Hey, Eli! Wait up!" It was Marla Torres, a girl from my homeroom, sharp, athletic, always smiling like she knew life's secret. She was captain of the girls' basketball team, and even though we'd barely spoken beyond class greetings, she jogged toward me, breath fogging in the cold. "Eli, listen," she said, brushing snowflakes from her jacket. "The team's heading to the Vermont Regional Basketball Championship next month. The school needs to send a student journalist to cover the games, it's part of the event. I thought of you." "Me?" I blinked. "Why me?" She grinned. "You write, don't you? I've seen you scribbling all the time. You'd be perfect." For a moment, the world stopped spinning. Someone had noticed. Someone had seen the thing I kept hidden between the margins of my notebooks. "Yeah," I stammered, "yeah, I'd love that." "Great. Here." She handed me a folded application form. "You'll need to fill this out and drop it off with Ms. Kelly before 6. I thanked her, heart pounding like a drumline, and turned back toward the school building. It was quiet now. Most classrooms were locked, the hallways echoing with the ghost of earlier chatter. I found an empty table in the open corridor beside the old science lab, sunlight pooling through the tall glass windows. The air smelled faintly of chalk and pine trees. Perfect place to write, I thought. I pulled out a pen and started filling the form, my breath fogging faintly as the clock ticked toward evening. That's when I heard it. "What do you think you're doing here?" The voice snapped like a whip. I looked up. Standing a few feet away was Jason Hartwell, the senior everyone admired, or feared. President of the student council. Star of the debate team. The kind of guy teachers called a born leader. I swallowed. Just filling out this application form, sir. For the regional journalist competition." He stepped closer, his boots echoing against the floor. He scanned the paper in my hand, then smirked. "You," he said, the word dripping with mockery. "You're applying for that?" My fingers tightened around the pen. "Yes." Jason chuckled, that confident, lazy kind of laugh that hurts more than shouting. "Don't make me laugh, kid. You're the quiet guy who sits in the corner doodling stories. Competing against real writers? Come on." I like to write," I managed, voice cracking slightly. His smirk deepened. "Then write in your diary. Because out there, you'll never win." The words slammed into me like ice water. He turned and walked away without waiting for a reply, his jacket fluttering behind him like a flag of arrogance. For a long minute, I just sat there, frozen. The sunlight shifted across the floor as if the world had kept moving but I hadn't. "You'll never win." The words echoed through my head, louder with every heartbeat. I didn't cry, though my chest burned. I just stared at the form. That's when the wind picked up, just a faint winter breeze from the open window, rustling the papers on the desk. And for some reason, it felt like a whisper, soft but firm, telling me, prove him wrong. I pressed my pen to the page and finished writing my name. When I walked out of the school that evening, the sky was deep violet, and the streetlights glowed like stars over the snow. My hands were cold, but my mind was burning with something I'd never felt before, a quiet, unwavering fire. A vow. I didn't know how, or when, or what it would take, but I promised myself that someday, somehow, I would make Jason Hartwell eat those words. And when he did, it wouldn't be loud or dramatic. It would be the kind of silence that makes a man's pride crumble. The following days blurred together, each one a battle against both the winter chill and the gnawing echo of Jason's words. "You'll never win." I found myself drifting through the halls of Burlington High, my notebook clutched like a shield. Everyone else's laughter sounded distant, almost foreign, while my own thoughts replayed that brief encounter with merciless clarity. I had always believed that if I worked quietly and wrote from the heart, someone would notice. But Jason's words introduced a new, unfamiliar terror, maybe no one ever would. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. Not Marla. Not my parents. Not even my closest friend, Lenny, who had a knack for finding humor in every tragedy. Sharing it felt like admitting defeat. Instead, I carried it like a secret weight, and in its place, something more dangerous began to grow: determination. By Friday, I had completed the application, but submission wasn't the finish line, it was the starting line. Over the weekend, I decided to immerse myself fully in preparation. I spent hours in the local library, combing through the few journalism books we had on the shelves. I interviewed my teachers about how to write compelling leads. I reread every story I could find in the Burlington Free Press, noting how reporters framed their narratives, how they gave life to games and personalities, how the ordinary became extraordinary on the page. At first, it was awkward. My initial attempts at mock articles were flat, clumsy, and dull. I had a difficult time summarizing games or capturing players' emotions convincingly. Sometimes I'd get discouraged and close my notebook, staring at the icy streets outside and wondering if Jason was right. And then, a small miracle happened. Without even realizing it, I started noticing things others didn't. One afternoon, while sitting on the school steps, I overheard a conversation between two players on the basketball team. One of them, a sophomore named Marco, had lost his father the previous year and was struggling with the pressure of balancing grief and performance. Another player, noticing his slump, spoke to him in quiet encouragement. I scribbled the conversation in shorthand in my notebook, not knowing yet what I would do with it. But later, as I shaped my first real article for the regional contest, I realized that this was the story I needed, the human side of the game, the hidden struggles behind the stats. That was the first twist. Success wouldn't come from talent alone, it would come from observation, empathy, and honesty. And it was terrifying. I had never felt so exposed, so responsible for translating real lives into words. Every evening, after my parents had gone to bed, I would retreat to the small study corner in our attic, the only space in our house that offered silence. The glow of the desk lamp cut into the darkness like a spotlight, illuminating the stacks of notes, drafts, and clippings I had collected. I would write for hours, sometimes stopping only to sip cold tea or scribble out paragraphs that didn't feel right. My fingers were raw from constant use, my eyes tired from reading and editing, but the fire inside me refused to die. It was during one of those late nights that I first imagined Jason reading my work. Not laughing. Not smirking. But quiet, stunned, perhaps even envious. The thought was intoxicating, yet I knew I couldn't let it become the reason I wrote. If it was, the articles would smell of revenge before they could breathe life. No, I had to write because the stories demanded it, because I wanted to. Then came a small, bitter setback. During a practice round of submissions at school, I nervously handed my article to Ms. Kelly, our English teacher, for feedback. She read it silently, her face betraying nothing. And then, she frowned. "Eli, this is, Ernest, I'll give you that," she said, tapping her fingers on the desk. "But it's clumsy. You need to be sharper, more precise. You can't just tell the story, you have to show it. Your sentences are long, and your paragraphs ramble. You'll never capture the judges like this." Her words hit differently than Jason's. Jason had mocked me with arrogance. Ms. Kelly's critique was measured, objective, but just as piercing. I wanted to lash out, to defend myself, but instead, I nodded, tight-lipped. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. The city lights outside my window sparkled faintly against the snow, indifferent and cold. I felt smaller than ever. But I also realized something crucial: the path ahead would be lonely. There would be setbacks. There would be ridicule. And there would be moments when even my own confidence would falter. I made a decision. I wouldn't let doubt stop me. I wouldn't let anyone define my limits. And most importantly, I wouldn't let Jason Hartwell's arrogance dictate the narrative of my life. That was the silent promise I made, to the shadows of my own fear, to the empty attic, and to the crisp Vermont air that smelled faintly of cedar and snow. I would write. I would persist. And one day, not just in my imagination, Jason would see me standing at the summit of something he had deemed impossible. But life, of course, had a habit of complicating even the best-laid plans. 2 weeks later, during one of the regional basketball scrimmages I attended for background notes, I encountered an unexpected obstacle. Marla Torres was nowhere to be found. She had been my bridge into the contest, but suddenly, she was absent, and no one seemed to know where she had gone. I panicked internally. Without her nomination and encouragement, would I still have the chance to compete? It was then that an unlikely ally appeared, Mr. Landon, our school librarian, a quiet man in his 50s who always smelled faintly of old books and cedarwood polish. "You're Eli, right?" he asked one morning, finding me hunched over my notebook in the library. "I hear you're entering the journalism contest. Marla usually handles submissions, but looks like she can't help this year. Don't worry. I can put in a word for you with Ms. Kelly." I blinked. You do that?" He smiled faintly, adjusting his glasses. "Sometimes the quiet ones surprise you. Just make sure your work is worth it." It was a small lifeline, but in that moment, it felt enormous. And so, armed with renewed determination and the first taste of mentorship, I doubled down on my practice, poring over every sentence, rewriting every paragraph, and experimenting with style and tone. The silent promise wasn't just a vow against Jason anymore. It had grown into something bigger, a commitment to my craft, to my integrity, and to the idea that hard work, observation, and honesty could outshine arrogance and cynicism. By the time February waned, I had filled notebook after notebook with mock articles, profiles, and drafts. I was no longer just a quiet kid with scribbles in the corner. I was a storyteller in the making. And yet, the fire of Jason's words never left me. It simmered, constant and controlled, a reminder that the world was watching, and that someday, the world, and he, would see me rise. March in Burlington had a way of feeling both beautiful and cruel at the same time. Snow crusted the sidewalks in icy ridges, while the sun, stubbornly low on the horizon, cast pale gold across the red brick buildings. I walked those streets like a ghost of myself some days, carrying my notebook, a pen tucked behind my ear, and a mind filled with story angles and character sketches. The regional journalism competition was just a month away, and every day I felt the pressure mounting. I was competing with older, more experienced students from other schools, some of whom already had bylines in local newspapers or school magazines. I was 15. I had never been published. And yet, I refused to let that stop me. The first real challenge came during my school's preliminary evaluation. Ms. Kelly, though quietly supportive, had organized a mock contest with a panel of teachers and a few senior students to simulate the judging process. The goal was simple: write a full article about a recent scrimmage between the boys and girls basketball teams. I thought I was prepared. I had spent hours observing the players, taking notes, recording their quirks and their small victories. But as I sat down in the cold library, my fingers trembling slightly, I realized I hadn't anticipated the clock. 60 minutes. That was all the time I had to write, edit, and finalize an article good enough to impress. I typed and scribbled furiously, chasing the rhythm of the game in my head. I highlighted moments of triumph, individual perseverance, and even subtle gestures, a captain consoling a player who missed a crucial shot, a coach whispering encouragement during a timeout. By the time I finished, my hands were sore, and I felt a flicker of pride. Then came the critique. The panel tore through my article like a storm. They complimented the effort but criticized sentence structure, pacing, and the clarity of my narrative. "Eli," Ms. Kelly said gently, though her words cut deep, "you see the story, but the story doesn't see the reader. You need to guide them, not just report." It stung worse than Jason's insult ever had. My own teacher didn't think I was ready. For a moment, I considered giving up, pushing the application into the trash and walking away. The thought hovered in my mind like a shadow. But something inside me had changed since that February afternoon. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I went home, locked myself in the attic, and rewrote every sentence. Paragraph by paragraph, I refined the article, read it aloud until it felt natural, and added details that would bring the characters to life. A week later, another test arrived, this time in the form of a scrimmage outside school. I had been given permission to cover the game for practice. As I watched, I noticed something that would later become pivotal. A junior named Dante Lewis, quiet and underestimated, had a way of making himself invisible on the court until the moment he scored. He reminded me of myself. I scribbled observations in shorthand, crafting narratives around his subtle heroics. But then came the twist that almost shattered me. During the game, my notebook slipped from my lap and tumbled onto the floor. In the chaos of bouncing basketballs and shouting spectators, a senior from another school picked it up. "What is this?" he laughed, flipping through the pages. "Journalism? You're 15. You think this will compete with us?" The words hit hard, but I forced a tight-lipped smile and retrieved my notebook. That night, lying on the attic floor with the notebook open in front of me, I thought about quitting. But I remembered Jason. I remembered that February afternoon and the quiet fire that had begun to burn inside me. I couldn't quit. Not now. So I doubled down. I woke up at dawn, walked the snowy streets to interview players for background stories, and stayed late into the evening writing, editing, and refining. Slowly, something magical began to happen. My perspective was different from the others. I didn't just report what happened on the court, I reported the people behind the action. The heartbreak, the determination, the silent victories that no one else saw. One evening, after hours of writing, I hit a breakthrough. I had been struggling with pacing, making my sentences flow without feeling forced. Suddenly, it clicked. I began to write an article about Dante, capturing the tension of his first big game, the pressure of his family expectations, and the way he had quietly lifted his team. For the first time, I didn't feel like a boy trying to prove himself. I felt like a journalist shaping a story that needed to be told. I submitted that piece for review, my heart hammering in my chest. Ms. Kelly read it in silence. Then, slowly, she smiled. "Eli, this is good. Really good. You're capturing the emotion and making the reader care." Keep this up, and you might just surprise everyone at the regional level." Her words ignited a new fire. I realized then that hard work alone wouldn't be enough. I needed courage, focus, and empathy. I wasn't just competing for revenge anymore, I was competing to be the best version of myself. And then came the final twist. Before the regional competition, Marla returned. She had been absent for 2 weeks due to a family emergency and had no idea what I had gone through in her absence. Seeing me hunched over my notebooks, eyes red from long hours of writing, she frowned. "Eli, you look like you've been through a war." "I have," I said, and didn't elaborate. "You're still entering, right?" she asked, her tone both supportive and curious. I nodded, a small grin breaking through. "Yeah. I'm ready." It wasn't just readiness for the contest that thrilled me, it was readiness for the moment when the boy who had laughed at me would have no choice but to watch me rise. That thought made the long nights, the frozen fingers, and the endless rewrites feel worthwhile. By the time the day of the regional contest arrived, I had written and rewritten dozens of practice articles. I knew my story angles, my interview notes, and even the small nuances of each player's gestures and expressions. I had prepared, not just to compete, but to win in a way that would speak louder than any insult ever could. I didn't know it yet, but the fire that had started with Jason's words had transformed me into something new, a storyteller, a chronicler of human triumph, and a boy who refused to be invisible. The first day of the Vermont Regional Basketball Journalism Competition felt like stepping into a new world. The gymnasium at Montview High School was buzzing with energy, players warmed up, coaches barked instructions, and the scent of polished floors mixed with popcorn from the concession stand. I clutched my notebook and my pen like lifelines, my stomach knotting with nerves that refused to untangle. I wasn't the only one here to write. There were 15 other student journalists from schools across the region, some already seasoned writers, others just like me, nervous and eager. They carried themselves with a confidence I didn't yet feel, but that would soon change. The competition was structured in 3 phases. Each day, we would cover that day's games, writing an article to be judged by a panel of professional journalists and local editors. The best article of the day would be published in the Vermont Youth Gazette, and by the end of the week, one best writer would be chosen to represent Vermont at the national level. I reminded myself, one day at a time. One story at a time. Day 1, a small victory. The first game I covered was a fast-paced match between Montview and Maplewood High. My hands shook as I scribbled notes, capturing every rebound, every shot, and every reaction on the bench. But rather than focus solely on the stats, I sought the stories behind them. The rookie guard shaking off a missed free throw, the senior captain urging him forward, the way the coach's eyes softened when a player executed a perfect pass. I stayed late into the evening to polish the article, refining sentences until each paragraph carried weight, nuance, and emotion. When I submitted it, I had no idea what the judges would think. The next morning, an email notification changed everything. My article had been chosen as the article of the day. I couldn't believe it. A small cash prize accompanied the recognition, but that wasn't what mattered. It was validation. Someone had seen the effort, the attention to detail, the heart I poured into words. For the first time, I felt like I belonged in this world. And yes, I allowed myself a small, private moment imagining Jason reading this, his smirk faltering. Day 2, unexpected rivalries. The next day, things became more complicated. I arrived at the gym early, notebook ready, and noticed a tall, confident boy from another school surveying the scene. His name was Trevor Sloan, and he had the kind of presence that made people follow his gaze without realizing it. From what I overheard, he had already won multiple school-level journalism contests. Trevor and I didn't speak, but throughout the day, his presence felt like a shadow over my shoulder. Every article I wrote, every line I crafted, seemed to pale in comparison, at least in my own mind. Self-doubt crept in, threatening to undo weeks of progress. Then, halfway through the second game, a twist occurred that shook me completely. Dante Lewis, the junior I had written about for my practice articles, was on the opposing team, and he recognized me. "Eli. Hey, I read your practice stuff," he whispered during a timeout. "You really get people. It's different." His words were brief, but they fueled me in ways praise from judges could not. It reminded me why I had started this in the first place, not for revenge, not for fame, but to capture life as it truly was, to make invisible stories visible. By the end of day 2, I felt a subtle shift. The nervousness that had gnawed at me was still there, but now it carried an edge of determination rather than fear. Day 3, the personal story. The final day of the regional contest demanded a best article submission. Judges encouraged us to submit stories that focused on the human side of basketball, the moments that would stay with readers long after the scoreboard was forgotten. I knew immediately what my piece would be about. It would be about Marco, the sophomore who had lost his father, and how he had quietly fought to find confidence in the face of grief. I had interviewed him for over an hour, listening to him stumble over words, watching him cry quietly in the corner of the gym after a loss. And then I wrote. I wrote until my fingers ached, until every sentence felt like a heartbeat in his story. When I submitted the article, I felt a strange combination of relief and terror. This wasn't just another practice piece. This was my soul on paper. A week later, the results arrived in the form of a simple email. Congratulations. Your article has been chosen as the best writer of the Vermont Regional Competition. You are invited to represent Vermont at the national level. I stared at the screen for a long time. My heart raced. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. It felt surreal. After months of isolation, long nights, and endless self-doubt, I had finally proven myself. Recognition and reflection. Back in Burlington, the news spread quietly at first. Teachers whispered congratulations in the halls. A small feature ran in the Burlington High Gazette, and my classmates began looking at me differently. Some smiled, some nodded in acknowledgement, while a few, predictably, shrugged, unaware of the internal battles that had led to this moment. I kept thinking about Jason Hartwell. By now, he had graduated, leaving Burlington High behind. Would he ever hear of this? Would he read about my success in the local paper, perhaps noting the quiet irony of the boy he had mocked now standing as Vermont's best writer? The thought made my chest tighten with satisfaction. Not anger, not revenge in the conventional sense, but a triumph so quiet, so undeniable, that it needed no explanation. Foreshadowing the national stage. Even as I celebrated the regional win, the next challenge loomed, the National Student Journalism Competition. I would be facing some of the most talented young journalists in the country, and this time, there would be no small victories to cushion the impact of failure. But now, I knew something crucial: failure was not the end. I had endured humiliation, rejection, and doubt, and I had survived. Every insult Jason had thrown at me, every critique I had endured from teachers or peers, had built a foundation. I had learned that success was not about proving someone wrong in a single moment, it was about quiet perseverance, about letting skill and effort speak louder than words ever could. And somewhere, in the back of my mind, I felt the first taste of the ultimate moment, the day when Jason Hartwell would encounter my success firsthand and realize that his arrogance had underestimated me. The flight from Burlington to New York City was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The hum of the plane, the shimmer of sunlight on clouds, and the small knot of nervous excitement in my stomach reminded me of the first time I had clutched my notebook in the Burlington High Library, unsure of whether I even belonged in the world of journalism. Now, here I was, 15 years old but carrying years of preparation, poised to compete on a national stage with the best young journalists in the country. The competition was held at a bustling convention center in Manhattan, a place alive with energy, ambition, and tension. Students from every corner of the United States buzzed through the hallways, some confident, some anxious, all eager to prove themselves. I felt a familiar flutter of nerves but also a quiet calm. I had survived doubt, criticism, and humiliation before. I could survive this. The national competition. The rules were similar to the regional contest, but the stakes were higher. Each day, we covered a series of basketball matches, producing articles under tight deadlines. Our pieces were judged by a panel of professional journalists, editors from national publications, and even a few celebrity sports reporters. The first day was grueling. I scribbled notes furiously, my hands cramping, my eyes scanning every gesture, every nuance, every tiny moment that could make a story breathe. I focused not on the competition itself, but on the humanity of the players, their struggles, triumphs, and fleeting vulnerabilities. By the end of the day, my article was chosen as Article of the Day, a small but crucial victory. It was affirmation that my approach, writing with empathy, observation, and honesty, was effective. But this was just the beginning. Twists and challenges. The second day brought unexpected complications. One of the players I planned to interview, a rising star named Jalen, refused to talk, frustrated and defensive. My carefully planned angle fell apart. I scrambled to find a new story, wandering the convention center, scanning the courts and bleachers for inspiration. Then, in a quiet corridor behind the main gym, I spotted a janitor setting up chairs for the next event. He had a kind face and a gentle demeanor. In a moment of curiosity, I approached and asked about his experiences with high school basketball. To my surprise, he told me stories of players who had overcome injury, family tragedy, and poverty to compete at this level. One story, in particular, struck me: a girl from a rural town who had trained her entire life with minimal support and still carried her team to victory. That became my article. I wrote quickly, shaping it with precision and care, and submitted it with only minutes to spare. This was the defining moment of the national contest for me, creativity born of observation, empathy, and adaptability. The judges noticed. My article was highlighted as the most compelling narrative of the day, and whispers began to circulate among the competitors. Who's that kid from Vermont? He's good. The final day. The last day was the most nerve-wracking. All participants were required to submit their best article from the week. This piece would determine the national title, and I had been planning it for days. I wrote about Marco, the sophomore I had met back in Burlington, who had lost his father and struggled to find confidence. I had followed his progress remotely, interviewing him via email and video calls. I told his story with the depth, empathy, and honesty that had become my signature style. When the winners were announced, I felt my stomach drop. My name appeared as National Favorite Journalist in the most voted category, the Reader's Choice. My article would be published in a national youth magazine, and I would be invited to speak at a journalism summit in New York. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled. Years of long nights, frozen fingers, and quiet determination had led to this exact moment. The sweetest revenge. Weeks later, back in Burlington, life returned to a sense of normalcy, but not entirely. The local paper ran a feature on me, highlighting my national achievement. My classmates stared at the article pinned on the notice board, and teachers congratulated me in the hallways. My writing became teaching material in English and journalism classes. And then, the moment I had imagined for so long arrived. I had been invited to a small alumni event at Burlington High. I hadn't expected to see Jason Hartwell there. After all, he had graduated 2 years earlier. But as I walked into the gym, shaking hands and exchanging polite greetings, I spotted him across the room. He was taller than I remembered, still confident, still the image of high school arrogance, but something in his expression froze. His eyes fell on me, and for the first time, I saw hesitation. Recognition. Disbelief. Jason Hartwell, the boy who had told me I would never win, who had laughed at my ambition, was watching as I shook hands with teachers, signed copies of my published article, and quietly accepted congratulations. His jaw tightened. His smirk faltered. I didn't approach him. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The sweetest revenge had nothing to do with shouting, confrontation, or humiliation. It was silent. It was undeniable. It was proof that I had outgrown the doubts and arrogance of someone who thought he could define my limits. Reflections. That night, I sat alone in my attic, the city lights glimmering faintly through the window. I reflected on the journey, the early humiliation, the long nights of rewriting, the mentors, the setbacks, and the victories. I realized something essential. Revenge isn't about making someone suffer, it's about becoming the person they said you couldn't be. Jason's words had been the spark. But the fire? The fire came from me. And now, whenever I hold a notebook or watch a player struggle and then triumph, I remember that quiet Vermont winter, the words that stung, and the silent promise that changed everything.